Hey guys, Christy here from the Stamp Cycle, and welcome to day 4 of my 2016 holiday card series. Today's card features some watercolor technique over some embossed images, doing that embossed resist technique. Really fun and easy technique, so let's get started. So I've got a piece of Canson XL watercolor paper cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. We will be cutting this down, so I wanted to make sure that I had that piece of watercolor paper slightly bigger than what I was going to need. We're going to be using the Flurry of Wishes stamp set from Stampin' Up. I'm going to use my Misty to stamp these images onto this piece of watercolor paper. The reason why I'm using my Misty is with watercolor paper, it is more difficult to get a nice crisp image the first time you stamp. So by using a tool like the Misty, you can stamp the same image several times in the same place without having to worry about any ghost stamping. It's perfect stamping. You can stamp it as many times as you want over and over and over in the same exact place. So I put all of my stamps here onto my watercolor paper, including the sentiment. I'm just doing that as a placeholder. Then I'll pick all of these up with my Door of the Misty. I did apply a generous amount of my embossing buddy there to this piece of watercolor paper because we will be heat setting this. And I'm going to stamp these images with Versamark ink, and I did stamp those 3 times to make sure I got really nice crisp images. So I've got some of this Wow embossing powder. This is a clear embossing powder, but it has this beautiful glitter in it. It's called the Shimmer Embossing Glitter, and it gives a beautiful image. And so when you're doing embossing powders with glitter and you go to heat set them, you want to first heat set them from the bottom, so that way when you put the heat tool on top, it doesn't blow all of your glitter off. So I'm going to heat set these images from the bottom. And now I've just taped down this whole watercolor piece to just a palette I have there, and I'm going to be watercoloring this using my Kuretake Gansai Tambi watercolors. Something like that. It's a mouthful, but these are fantastic watercolors. I love them. I use them a lot. I highly recommend them. They're a great starter set if you don't have any other watercolor options. So I just laid down some clean, clear water all over this watercolor piece, and I'm going to be applying several different colors of watercolors and blending those in between. So I'm trying to achieve a watercolor wash in the background, but using several different colors. The key to getting a really nice wash to your background is you want to apply the color lightly at first, and then you can build on your color from there. With watercolors, they do dry back light, but you've got to remember that you don't want to go heavy to start out with, because you can always add more color, but it's not as easy to take color away. So that's why I'm starting out really light with these colors, trying to blend them in between the transitions there with some water. And then I did let this dry in between each application of the color. I let it air dry instead of using my heat tool. I just wanted to see what kind of effect I got as opposed to using my heat tool. So now I'm just coming back in. I'm applying that second layer of heavier watercolor paint. I did not apply as much water with this watercolor. This is heavier because I wanted to make sure I had vibrant color. And again, I'm just going over the same areas with the same color, using a little bit of water to blend those in between the color transitions to try to get a nice, even watercolor wash. These colors did blend nicely together in between the transitions there, so it gave a nice gradient effect from the purple down to this light kind of bluish purple color. So again, I'm not an expert at watercoloring, but I do find that I can get a decent looking watercolor wash by using this technique here. I used a paper towel to pick up any areas that had a lot of paint sitting there, especially on those snowflakes, so that those snowflakes popped from the back. So now I'm just going to test that it's nice and dry before I start adding some splatters, and the way you can do that is just placing your hand, the back of your hand, onto the watercolor paper. If it is still cool to the touch, that means it's still wet, so it needs some more time to dry. But now I'm just going to, this is nice and dry, and I'm going to start adding some splatters. I have this Irresistible Pico Embellisher in silver. I just put a little bit there on my palette, added a little bit of water, and then just kind of flick that onto my background using my paintbrush. This is a smaller size paintbrush than the one that I did my watercolor background. I wanted to get smaller drops of splatter, so the smaller the paintbrush you use, the smaller the splatters you get. So I just went in with some of that purple paint that I used, and also some of the blue to give some additional splatters to this background. Now I also took this white and then this sort of like a pearlescent color, mixed those together, and then added some of the splatters to the background using those two colors mixed together as well. I wanted to give a little bit of white splatter to bring in the white of the background and the snowflakes. So now I'm just going to trim this down in my paper trimmer. I trimmed about 1/8 of an inch off all 4 of the sides so that when we applied it to our card base, there would be, the card base would peek around all 4 sides of this watercolor panel. So now I'm just going to use my Misty again to stamp the sentiment. I am going to be using the Merry Christmas from that same stamp set. And I'm using my Misty so that I get the perfect placement and also that it's stamped straight. I'm using this grid transparency to make sure I got that sentiment nice and straight, and now I'm just going to ink it up with some Versamark ink, and I will again stamp that several times to make sure I get a nice crisp image, especially over all of this watercoloring that I did. And then I've got some of this platinum embossing powder by Wow. I'm just going to apply that to my sentiment, pour it back into my little tube or little container there, and then I will heat set this with my heat tool. Again, I'm going to start from the back to heat up this sentiment before I apply the heat to the front. And now that we've got our sentiment heat set, now it's time to work on our card base. This is a top folding A2 card base made out of smoky slate, and I wanted this to be sparkly like the rest of the card. So I've got my Spectrum Noir shimmer pen. I just squeezed some out there onto an acrylic block so I can use that kind of as a palette. I wanted to make sure I got nice even sparkle all over each side of this background. So I just kind of pick some up with my Sparkle Noir pen and just color it down. This gives a really nice sparkle to really any image. And then to add even more shine and sparkle, I'm using this shimmer spritz. I just shake it up really, really well and then spray it over that entire background, probably from about 1 and 1.5 feet away from my card panel there. So now I'm just going to take some fun foam. I'll cut that down so that it'll fit nicely onto the back of this watercolor panel. This watercolor panel did warp quite a bit, so the fun foam really gives a nice even dimension and kind of helps get that card base to glue onto, well, your card front to glue onto your card base without having as much warping. So I just used some Tomo multi-purpose glue there to glue the all these layers together, and then I will just glue that onto my card base. And now to finish this card off, I wanted to add even more bling to this Christmas card, and I'm just going to add some of these rhinestones from Stampin' Up. These rhinestones are great. They're really easy to just pick up with your poke tool and add to your card, and it really gives just that extra little embellishment and extra little interest to the cards here. So here are the 3 watercolor cards I made. That first one had more blues, and then for the last 2 I brought in that purple color, and I really liked how it turned out. So thank you guys for joining me for day 4, and I will see you again on the next video. Bye!